Sunday we're going to head to the sanctuary and join in worship with your children at 9:30. They will go back to Sunday school at 10 o'clock as usual, and those that are in choir will sing during the service and then head down and come back at 11. This week we're going to continue, and we actually match up with what's happening in the sanctuary, so I'm excited. Our story comes from John. John is an interesting gospel writer. He tends to be a little bit more artistic and metaphorical in his language, which often makes us a little bit perplexed when we read him. You probably really should have some type of a PhD when you're reading John. But since we don't, hopefully I can help you answer some of the questions that might arise. So John writes about this story in a different way than any other gospel. Our passage is John 2:13 through 22. It's the story of Jesus going into the temple and getting very angry and doing some crazy things as far as what the disciples think. The story uses, like I said, some different terminology. John introduces the idea of Jesus going in and immediately taking action. In Mark, there is also this same story, but not with as much intensity as John puts it. John sends Jesus in with whips and turning tables and angry yells, and even does this little bit about the raising of the temple, but we'll talk about that in a sec. What is interesting, though, is Jesus goes in and is upset at what's happening. Our Jewish brothers and sisters celebrate a time when they make sacrifices to God. At least in ancient Israel, this was something that everybody was pretty akin to and accustomed to doing when they went to the temple. As a farmer, you might bring your best animal to make this sacrifice. But what was happening is they found ways to profit off of such an exchange. Instead of the best animal that you had, they had inspectors set up to look at the animals and make sure that you had to buy what was available there. Jesus doesn't like this. He gets angry and throws over temple tables and really disrupts the atmosphere in the courtyard outside of the temple. He then challenges them and says, "Destroy this temple in 3 days and I will raise it up." The Jewish people are very confused. This temple that they stood in was built by Solomon, and it took 46 years to make. How was it that he would destroy it and raise it again in 3 days? Of course, Jesus is talking about his physical temple, his body, and reminding them and telling them, "I will be resurrected." This is the icing on the cake for the temple Pharisees and religious leaders that would then persecute Jesus. What does this mean for us? The story is somewhat of a struggle, as we don't really know and see very often the angry Jesus that we see in this story. But something that is helpful for us to remember is that God wants us to be faithful. Even when we think that we are doing just little bits of sidestepping and not following all the rules that we're required to, we want to remember that God is part of that too. There's a song that you might know from camp or when you were young that says, "They will know we are Christians by our love." I encourage you to think this week about the ways that you know God is working through and around you. And remember, even in those times when we feel like going the shorter path would be easier, it might not always be the right way. Have a good week.